In 1936, on a plantation porch in the Cotton South, a tenant stood waiting while the man who owned the land bent over a ledger and figured. He had brought in 5 bales that year, heavy with a season of his family's labor, and the long owl-eyed figuring went on until the landlord looked up. The 5 bales came out exactly even. Not a penny owed, not a penny coming. The whole year balanced to the dollar against the furnish, the seed and the meal and the back interest. The tenant brightened because even was better than behind. And then he made his mistake. He mentioned he had 1 more bale not yet hauled in. The landlord's face fell, and he bent back over the book and said, "Well, now that changes things, because now I will have to figure it all again to make that 6th bale come out even too. Most of us could not reconcile a month of our own accounts without help, and we can all read. These families could not read at all, and the men holding the pencil knew it. We picture them helpless at the ledger, taking whatever number they were handed, and that picture is a lie. They could not read the book, so they built their own, in gourds and on door frames, and in the knots of a string, a hidden tradition of bookkeeping in the hands of people who never wrote a word. Tonight, we count down 30 of those methods. 2 matter more than the rest. 1 was a quiet thing done at the cotton scale, and skipping it could erase a family's whole year. 1 was so dangerous that teaching it to a single child could bring the whole arrangement down. We start at 30. Number 30, the kernel jar. At the end of a picking day, a hollow gourd sat on a shelf by the cabin door, and for every measured weight of cotton off the family's backs, 1 dried bean dropped in with a dry rattle. By week's end, you could lift the jar and feel the season, and it cost only beans they would have eaten anyway. But a jar counts what you carried from the field, never what you owe. And before we go on, if a method this plain could outlast the men who looked down on it, subscribe, because the count at number 1 is the one they were most afraid you would learn. Number 29, the door frame. Every cabin had 1 soft pine going gray, and on it a man kept the 1 account he controlled, a scratch from a knife or chalk for each sack of meal, drawn against the coming crop. A family read those marks daily, even unable to read, and the wall remembered honestly. But the store's book remembered differently, and at year's end, it was the store's memory that counted, which is why the next method moved the marks where they could not be rubbed away. Number 28, the knotted cord. A string hung on a nail by the hearth. A woman tied a knot into it for every item drawn on credit, a hard knot she could find in the dark. People have counted this way for thousands of years because a knot needs no schooling to make or read. But a knot counts a thing, not a price, and not the interest stacked on top. And the interest was where they had you. The next method belonged to the 1 person the landlord rarely watched. Number 27, the EGG and butter money. The cotton belonged to the furnish before it was picked, but the henhouse and the churn did not. A tenant's wife kept her own reckoning of eggs and butter and garden truck, in coins folded into a rag in a flour tin, small money, nickels and dimes. But hers, the 1 ledger the landlord never touched. That untouched corner mattered more than its size, and you will see why near the end. The next method gave the household something to hold. Number 26, the hearth stick. A worn broom handle stood in the corner, and on it the family cut notches for the running tally of the house, the way people have marked sticks since long before there were books. It lived by the fire, and a child learned the year by running a finger down the cuts. A humble practice piece, but the practice mattered because a few rungs down this list, a stick like it would fight the landlord's book to a draw. First, 2 smaller counts. Number 25, the button reckoning. On a swept dirt floor, a family laid out buttons and coins in piles, one for dollars owed and one for dollars made, sliding them together to stand for sums they could not write. A grandmother who never held a pencil could move those buttons and reach a truth. It was slow, and a breeze could scatter a year's figuring across the floor, but it held a number long enough to compare. The next method counted something harder to pin down. Number 24, the count of seasons. With no almanac anyone could read, a family kept time by the work. By when the dogwood bloomed and the first frost was due, and how many Sundays stood between planting and picking. They knew what was owed by where they stood in the year, because the furnish came in a rhythm and the reckoning came at the end of it. Knowing the season was knowing the deadline, and the next method gave them their first voice at the table. Up to here, the counting stayed close to the cabin, where a wrong number cost a family its pride. From here, it moves into the open, to the scale and the store, where a wrong number cost a family the whole year. Number 23, the child who could cipher. Where the grandparents had been born into slavery and never allowed a letter, sometimes one grandchild had a few months of schooling, enough to add a column and read a figure. At settlement, that child sat quiet in the corner, following every number the landlord figured aloud under his breath. A whispered sum from a 10-year-old could not yet overturn the book, but it could plant a doubt, and doubt was new. That whisper grows louder all the way to number 1. For now, the count moved to the most dangerous place on the plantation. Number 22, keeping your own weight slips. When the cotton went on the scale, the man at the beam wrote the weight on a small paper slip, and a family's labor became a number in someone else's hand. So they kept the slips, every scrap the weigher tore off, saved in a tin box at home through the whole picking, a paper trail held by people who could not read it. At settlement, the tin came out, slip by slip, evidence against the single figure in the book. This was the quiet thing I promised you, and skipping it meant your year was whatever they said. But a slip only helps if someone besides the weigher saw it written. Number 21. The witness at the scale. The man who owned the land controlled the weighing, the selling, and the writing of it, and a number with one witness could drift, so a family never let the cotton be weighed alone, sending a brother or a neighbor to stand at the beam, watch it settle, and read the weight aloud, so 2 people carried it home instead of 1. This was the danger I told you about, the few seconds where a year could vanish, and the watching is what stopped it. 2 witnesses beat 1 book until the book got creative further up the page. Number 20, counting the wagon loads. Before any scale, there was the haul, mule and wagon, groaning to the gin, and a family counted those trips the way a miser counts coins. A man who had counted his own wagons could stand at settlement and say, "I brought in this many, whatever the page showed," a count made in daylight and impossible to deny. Lose track of your loads and you lost your footing before the argument began. The wagons told one story, and at the gin, a piece of paper told another. Number 19, matching the gin ticket. The gin gave a receipt, weight, and bale number printed plain, one of the only true papers a family ever held. They could not read the words, but they learned the shape of their bale numbers and matched the ticket against the wagons they had counted and the slips in the tin. 3 counts that agreed were a wall. 3 that disagreed showed where the leak was. But the biggest leak was never in the cotton. It was in the store. Number 18, memorizing the store tab. The commissary ran on credit at prices set high and climbing, and the book sat behind the counter where no tenant could reach. So families memorized a man and his wife saying the day's purchases aloud on the long road home, over and over, until the list was set like a hymn. At settlement, they recited what they had truly drawn, and any charge not in the song was a charge to question. The prices, though, could still be padded, which is why the next method watched the number the landlord wanted you to ignore. Number 17, watching the price per pound. A bale was worth only what cotton was worth that season, and a family kept in debt was encouraged not to ask. So they asked, listening at the gin and the crossroads and the church for what cotton was bringing. $12 a bale in lean years in some places, and held that number against what the landlord claimed he got. A man from the Mississippi Delta whose parents sharecropped remembered that $12 bale, remembered picking hard just to eat. Knowing the price was half the fight. The other half was doing the sum yourself. Counting what you carried was watchfulness. Setting your count against the landlord's book and making the two answer to each other was the real labor. Number 16, two people figuring it twice. A single person's arithmetic could go wrong, and a wrong count in your own favor was worse than none, because it could be used to call you a liar. So families figured everything twice by two people apart, then compared. And when two reckonings landed on the same figure, that figure was iron. You could carry it into the settlement room and not be talked out of it. Courage was about to be needed, because the next method was the one the landlords feared on sight. Number 15, the split tally stick. Here is the method that was not a folk habit, but a genuine technology, old as commerce itself, built for people who could not read. A stick was notched across its width, one notch to the measure, then split down its length so each party kept a half, and neither side could add a notch or shave one away without the cut showing when the halves were laid together. Set against the furnish, that running debt of seed and meal advanced on next year's crop. It was the one record a landlord could not quietly improve after dark. So few survive today because the men who lost by them made sure of it. The next method kept a whole year of truth in pictures. Number 14, the picture ledger, unable to write the words plow or fertilizer or fatback. Families drew them, a private shorthand of marks for each thing, drawn against the crop, a stroke for a sack of meal, a different one for a yard of cloth, kept on a board or a scrap of hide. It grew through the season into a full account of the furnish in symbols, and no clerk could claim a charge that had no mark. The danger was that a private language can be lost with the one who made it, but while it lived, it walked into settlement and spoke. Number 13, the settlement reckoning. Everything led to one afternoon in the fall, the tenant on one side of the table and the man who owned his year on the other, and the families who fared best came loaded, bringing the tin of slips, the counted wagons, the gin ticket, the picture ledger, the doubled sums, and laying their count beside his. Remember the man with 5 even bales and the unlucky 6th. The families who could answer that owl-eyed figuring with a figure of their own might still lose. But they lost knowing, and sometimes knowing shamed a number back into honesty. To bring a count that strong, you had to track the year from its first day. Number 12, tracking the furnish from the start. The cheating did not wait for harvest. It began with the first sack of seed, because every item advanced in spring was a deduction waiting at year's end. So careful families counted the furnish as it came in, marking each bag of fertilizer and draw of meal and pair of shoes the day it arrived. An advance you logged in March could not become 2 by November. Let the early months blur, and the book filled them in for you. Number 11, the cotton row count. Long before the scale, a family had a fair guess at its crop, because it had counted the rows and weighed the picking in its arms day after day. A tenant who had done that sum in the field walked to the gin already knowing roughly what he had, and when the announced weight came in far under his estimate, he knew to look hard at the beam. An estimate is not proof, but one close to the truth told a man when the truth was being bent. Number 10. Reading just the figures. Full letters could wait because what a family needed first was numbers. The digits and the dollar column and the shape of its own name. And many a tenant set out to learn exactly that much and no more. Enough to follow the landlord's pencil down the page and see whether the column added the way it should. Enough to know when the figuring went wrong. A landlord who once figured before a blind man now figured before a watchful one. From here, the method stopped being about surviving the system and start being about getting free of it. Everything so far was a way to live inside the arrangement with your eyes open. The last methods are different in kind. They are not about counting the trap. They are about the door. Number 9. The kept agreement. The terms existed on paper. Share contracts ran back generations. 2 formerly enslaved men in Marshall County, Mississippi, signed on for 40 acres of corn and 20 acres of cotton. As early as 1867, most tenants never held their copy, and many places saw to it that way. But a family that kept its agreement, even someone who could not read alone had something to carry to a trusted reader who would read it back true. A contract you keep can be checked. Number 8. Pooling counts with the neighbors. One family doubting its settlement. A contract you never see is whatever the owner says on settlement day. Was easy to dismiss as bad arithmetic or bad luck. A dozen families comparing what each was charged for the same sack of fertilizer at the same store. Was something else because the padding showed the moment neighbors laid their figures side by side. Alone you suspected, together you knew. The risk was real, since comparing notes looked like organizing, and organizing was punished. But knowledge, once shared, could not be unshared, and it wanted a place to live. Number 7. The Union Ledger. In the 1930s, in the cotton country of Arkansas and beyond, tenants both black and white did the unthinkable and sat down in the same room, forming the Southern Tenant Farmers Union to keep accounts no single landlord could erase. They wrote down evictions and short settlements and padded furnishes, witnessed one another's reckonings, and held a record larger than any one plantation book. A count kept by a single family could be burned, but a count kept by a movement could not. They were met with violence for it, but for the first time the bookkeeping had a body behind it. Number 6. The memory ledger. Books could be lost, tins taken, door frames burned with the cabin, sticks tossed in the stove, and many a careful count vanished exactly when it was needed most. What could not be taken was the number a person carried in the head. A woman who remembered year upon year that she had made 20-odd bales and still come out behind, that she had cleared nothing and gone back to borrow against the next crop just to eat, was keeping the truest ledger of the furnish there ever was. They could dispute her paper. They could not revise her memory. That memory became testimony, and testimony became history. Number 5. The buried tin. A family wholly inside the furnish was a family wholly owned, every dollar accounted for before it was earned, and so the wisest kept a sliver of themselves outside the count. A few coins from the egg and butter money, a small cash sale made quietly down the road, buried under a floorboard or beside a fence post, money the landlord did not know existed and could not subtract. It was not enough to get rich, only enough to buy a little time or distance when the settlement came back wrong again. A dollar they could not count against you was a dollar of freedom. Number 4. The lamp-lit lesson. After the longest days in the field, In cabins where the parents had never been taught a letter, the figuring lessons happened by lamplight, a mother or an older child drilling the younger ones in numbers when the work was done. It was teaching done in exhaustion by people who had every reason to sleep, because tonight's lesson was tomorrow's reckoning. Numeracy was the one inheritance no landlord could repossess, and they passed it down in the dark, on purpose, which leaves the three methods the men who owned the land feared most, because everyone pointed at the same place, the way out. Number 3, the move as accounting. When the book said even year after year, when no count you brought could make the figure come out in your favor, the leaving itself became a verdict. Slipping away in the night to another county was risky and sometimes deadly, since debt could bind a family to the land, and the law sided with the man who kept the book. But a family that knew it was being robbed could make the hardest calculation of all, that one more year here was worth less than the danger of going. Moving solved a single year, not the system, and the family that left often found the same book waiting under a new name. Number 2, school for the columns. The school year for tenant children was a poor, short thing, a few months snatched between planting and picking, and even then, the books had to be bought at real hardship by people who had almost nothing. Families paid it anyway and sent the children when they could be spared, and often when they could not, aimed at one quiet target, a child who could read the columns. Not for poetry, not for pride, though those came too, but so that one day someone of that family's own blood could sit at the settlement table, take up the book, and check the man who had never expected to be checked. Number 1, learning to read the book. Everything we have counted tonight, every kernel in the gourd, every knot in the cord, every notch split down a tally stick, every slip saved in a tin, was a bridge to a single morning, the morning a family could finally read the furnish for itself, read the seed and the meal and the interest stacked on top, read the column the landlord added aloud, and say out loud in front of him, that figure is wrong. That was the master skill, the one that held all the others inside it, because a count you cannot read is a count you must take on faith. And faith was the whole machinery of the trap. This is why teaching a child those letters frightened the men who owned the land more than any union or any midnight move. A jar of beans they could laugh at, a reader they could not. The furnish had ruled for as long as it could not be read, and the day it could be read, it stopped being a chain and became only a number, and a number, unlike a chain, can be argued. That is what these families knew, scratching marks on a door frame with hands that would never read a book, that they were teaching the generation who would. So here is the small thing to carry out of all this. Somewhere in your own life there is a number you have let someone else keep, a figure you take on faith because checking it feels like too much trouble or not quite your place. This week, find that one number and check it yourself. The way a family once saved every slip in a tin against the day it would matter. And tell me something below, because every family has this story buried somewhere. Did yours ever keep account? Nobody outside could read, a jar of buttons on a shelf, a knotted string on a nail, a figure a grandmother carried in her head and never wrote down and never got wrong. I want to hear it. Next time we go into the Hoovervilles, the shanty towns thrown together from cardboard and crate wood and flattened tin, and the building tricks ordinary people used to turn a city's garbage into a home that held through winter, the homes the city kept sending men to bulldoze. Subscribe so you do not miss it, because the people who raised those walls out of nothing were keeping a kind of furnish too, an account of what they were owed and never given, and they settled it the only way they could, by surviving in plain sight.